Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I love this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Welcome to day 2 here on the Builder stage. My name is Alex. I'm the editor-in-chief of TechCrunch Plus. And here on this stage, throughout the rest of this day, we are going to hear from founders. We're going to hear from operators. You will have the chance to ask questions, quite a lot of how-to topics. If you know TechCrunch Plus, you'll know what we do here. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks for
we have
help.
a really great day ahead of you.
Timer on the stage?
Notes. We do have otter.ai running, I think, on all the stages.
We'll have
so
fun.
you don't have to worry about taking notes. We will have that for you. I think you can find a link in the application itself. And the Deal Flow Cafe is behind me, and the TechCrunch Plus Lounge is right out there to your left in case you need to know your way around. And today on the Builder stage, we are going to talk a lot about the labor market and how it relates to startups, how to stretch venture capital dollars, and of course, what you need to raise a Series A today. However, as we do at Disrupt each and every day, we are going to kick off with one of our podcasts, and today is no exception. We are going to hear from Chain Reaction, our crypto-focused podcast, which is moderated by Jacquelyn Melinek. And today we have Chris from Haun Ventures, so please give him a welcome, and I'll see you all in half an hour. Bye.
Good morning. We love the early risers. How are you guys? I am Jacquelyn Melinek, and I am the host of Chain Reaction, and we are doing this live here today at Disrupt. And Chain Reaction is a show that breaks down the biggest news, trends, and drama in crypto. That's kind of like our slogan. And for this special live episode, I'm joined by Chris Lehane from Haun Ventures. Prior to joining Haun Ventures, where he's the chief strategy officer, he was an executive at Airbnb for years. He also co-founded a strategic consultancy firm, Fabian and Lehane, that advises political, corporate, tech, entertainment, and professional sports clients. A lot of different things. And in the 90s, he also held various government roles like press secretary to VP Al Gore and was special assistant counsel to President Bill Clinton. Chris? Thanks for coming.
Thanks. I had a lot more hair then.
Yeah.
But I know I've arrived. I'm now on Chain Reaction, and here at Disrupt. So thanks for having me.
It's a great resume. But let's start off by discussing your background. I mean, you went from government to Airbnb to crypto. I feel like that's a bit of a roller coaster of a resume. What led you here?
I think there's a couple things. First of all, just generally the way I am wired, no pun intended. I constantly try to do new chapters in life. And one of the things that I've always strived to do, this is something that actually Katie Haun at the fund talks a lot about, which is doing your next thing should be 50% new. It's sort of a lifelong learning growth mindset. But in particular, specific to crypto, and we were talking a little bit about this backstage. I'll try to do the short version of this. But you mentioned I was an executive at Airbnb, and I was involved with the process to take the company public. Showed up at a conference like this, which was awesome, people talking about, going public and everything that goes into that. But at Airbnb, the folks who really drove the source of the wealth were the Airbnb hosts, the people who make their homes available. And when we decided we were going to take the company public, we spent a good year plus negotiating with the SEC to see if we could provide those hosts equity. We were told by the SEC that there's this rule of 500. Once you give out more than 500 shares, you're considered a public company. And so we couldn't do that. Company goes public, wildly successful, $100 billion company the day it goes out. Founders, incredibly values-driven, created an endowment for those hosts. But at the end of the day, right, folks like myself did well. The banks, which really only put their balance sheet to work on this, ended up doing extraordinarily well. But those hosts didn't get to participate in the upside of that wealth. And it really just reminded me and struck with me that, when you have new things like an Airbnb, you need new rules for a new thing if you want everyone in society to be able to really fully participate and benefit from it. And so for me, I took a look at what Airbnb was, to me a little bit of maybe Web 2.5, and then looked at crypto, which by its the very underlying technology of the blockchain, and I come from the left, is inherently progressive. It's democratic, it's distributed, it's inclusive, it's open, and really saw that as an opportunity to be able to drive the type of economic results for society that, I think benefit us. But it was really coming from that experience and, seeing how folks were thinking about these old rules and not being flexible in terms of reimagining what the world could look like.
Right. And in terms of the IPO world, earlier this week we saw Instacart went public. We have a few crypto companies that have gone public. What do you think of that in terms of whether crypto companies should go for the IPO route, or is it kind of like depends on who's involved?
I think it very much depends on the underlying model.
Like, what about the startups you work with?
Of the particular, yeah. So, right. So obviously, when you think about the startups that we invest in, right, there's both, startups that are sort of structured around a token model. There's startups that may be more traditional in terms of whether they would go ultimately through the IPO route. I think the way we think about it is ultimately like we're investing in that talent. One of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about is, hey, can I explain this business model to a normal person? Would a normal person be able to understand how this technology is potentially going to impact them and make their lives better? And so for us to be able to answer that question and then ultimately translates into this is going to be a successful business, regardless in which direction and which route it chooses to follow.
And before we move on, another question I always like to ask guests on the podcast when we start, but I went into your background first because it was just an interesting background. I like to ask, can you tell me about someone you've met in the past 12 months in the crypto industry that you were inspired by, and what did you learn from them?
Okay, so I could spend
You only get to pick one.
I could spend the next 24 minutes and 53 seconds talking about it.
We'll go through
one of the awesome things about my job and my role is I get to meet these incredible founders every day. And these are folks that are thinking about where the world is going. In many ways, they're living in the future. They're incredibly optimistic. They're builders. They're creators. And I'm not ducking your specific question. It is just there are so many. So I'm gonna give you a story. How's that? I'll give you a story. I'm not gonna give you a name.
Okay.
Yeah, but it does involve.
Sometimes people do.
We met with a founder. This was maybe 3 or 4 months ago. It may have been longer. As you get older, you start to lose track of time, right?
We'll do the math.
And this person was from Asia. I think they were late teens. Third company that they had started and successfully launched. Had gone to UC Berkeley, computer science, graduated in a couple of years. Really thinking about how you could actually use blockchain technology in a really interesting way, in an interesting space. I'm not going to get into too many details, but we're doing the meeting. It's gone a couple hours. And this person gets up and said, well, I have to go. And we're like, oh, why? And he's like, my dad's in the parking lot. He was waiting for me. And it was just one of those moments that was just so awesome to have someone of that. And if you were in this conversation, like incredibly sophisticated on the engineering, incredibly sophisticated on the business model, and yet someone who was a Gen Zer and still a Gen Zer, and just seeing that all play out. Like I'm the dad of 2 teenagers, and seeing what that generation is thinking and how they're approaching the world. In the political environment today, there's just a lot of negativity and pessimism. When you come to conferences like this, people in this room, like folks are thinking optimistically about where the world is going, the problems, but not just the problems, how they can be solutions to the problems.
Right.
And that particular meeting just has stayed with me because you had, half kid, half incredible technologist who's going to be wildly successful, really thinking about the problems of the world and how he can actually help contribute to solving them.
Yeah, I know when I go to crypto conferences and I meet people who are younger than me, and they're like anywhere from like 18 or 23 or whatever, 25, and they've already closed a company or they're doing another, and I'm like, wow, I got to do a bit more with my life.
You do, you did my bio. I don't feel like my bio compared to these kids who are 18, 19 have already far surpassed that.
It's definitely impressive for sure.
Yeah.
So you're a chief strategy officer, and I think it's a very timely moment in the crypto world to have a role like that. We see a lot of VCs pivoting, whether it's a generalist firm that is now like leaving crypto or crypto firms that are changing their strategies. I'd love to know how Haun Ventures is kind of navigating the scene right now amid all the US regulatory situations, I could call it.
Yeah, so as a fund, we raised just as there was the significant macroeconomic correction. And so we have the proverbial dry powder at a really interesting time, just from a pure fund perspective to be investing. But, adjacent to the earlier points I was making, like the stuff that we see is really incredible. And I'll maybe try to do an analogy here because I think I'm old enough to do this. You mentioned I was in the Clinton administration in the 90s. I came out here in 2001, right? And the dot-com became the dot-bomb. Headlines in New York Times and other outlets, not TechCrunch. The internet is dead. The internet is
starting.
Yeah, you're just starting then. The internet is over, basically. Right. And anyone who was out here knew there was just an incredible amount of activity taking place. What you could broadly call the infrastructure level. Look, some of the companies that blew up in 2001 had no business of being around. Some of them were just ahead of their time, like before mobile had really developed the technological platforms and structure to be able to exist. Some became wildly successful. And I think we're sort of in a similar or analogous time period. And tech does go in those types of cycles. And so we do see this enormous amount of work taking place at the infrastructure level. I said earlier, part of our test is, will someone be able to understand how this is going to work? And so, in crypto, you have level 1, which is sort of the currency level. Level 3 is, think about that as apps. And then you have level 2, which is sort of the in-between infrastructure. And amongst the challenges in crypto is crypto all came at the same time compared to maybe Web 1, where it happened sequentially, right? Like you couldn't get network computing until you had HTTP. And so that is sort of some of the stuff that is taking place, within the crypto space right now. I think we sort of see 3 interesting areas. Asset class. I mean, there's 400+ million people in the world who use crypto. 52 million here in the U.S. To put that in perspective, I think that's 5x more than the number of people who have electric vehicles in this country, just to put that in perspective, right? I think 3x, I'm doing this off the top of my head, more than the number of folks who hold a union card, more than the number of people, I think by a factor of 2 who directly hold stock. That's a lot of people. But where I'm going with that is, like, just take a step back. There has never been one time in human history that global currencies were created without a sovereign entity backing them. It's a really big deal to have multiple global currencies that have been created that are people to people. So asset class is out there. I think, secondly, as a storage of value, I actually think that's going to intersect as we go forward a little bit with AI in interesting ways, but as a way to store value. I mean, right now you have a writer's strike, an actor's strike in Hollywood. Imagine if you could actually, put your IP on the blockchain and actually be able to have long-term lifetime value in that. And then I think the third area that we are really interested in is how blockchain, because of its underlying tech, can uniquely solve a long-term issue that has long plagued society, which is how do you actually reconcile the conflict between identity and privacy? Usually, in almost every case, you have to pick one at the expense of the other. Massive centralized platforms today obviously build their models off of an algorithmic leverage model. Blockchain can actually uniquely solve so that's no longer a conflict. I won't go into all the details. I won't talk about Merkle trees or multi-party computational computing.
Do that,
or ZK knowledge proofs. But those are the underlying technology that helps make that possible. And so those are sort of the areas that I think we think are really interesting. And there's others out there as well.
Yeah. I guess given where we are today, though, a lot of people are saying that the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, is doing regulation by enforcement, and that's not a favorable aspect for many. They just get hit with a lawsuit. Maybe they heard whispers beforehand. Who knows? But I would love to know your thoughts, given that you've worked in the government, now you're in crypto. Do you feel like Chair Gary Gensler and the team are going about it the right way, or is there a better way to enforce and create regulatory clarity?
Yeah, so I don't think the SEC has been pursuing this in a way that is really consistent with the American tradition, which is, government seeking to work in partnership with innovators, builders, entrepreneurs, job creators, to the benefit of the whole country. Now, that flows both ways, by the way. But for a reference point, 1996, Clinton White House, what was then known as the World Wide Web is emerging. A lot of conversations initially about regulating it through the FCC as if it was just the next thing, a radio, basically the same regulatory framework you'd have for radio and TV. And the Clinton White House, working in a bipartisan way with Republicans and Democrats on the Hill, made a really strategic decision. They established a North Star. We wanted to make sure that the World Wide Web would be based in the U.S. It was going to be a next stage after the industrial age, right? So, but we then passed the 1996 Telco Act, wildly successful if the definition of success was to meet the goal of making sure that the internet economy was based here. I mean, you flash forward all the way to right before the pandemic, the 5 largest companies in the world by market cap existed between here and Seattle. I think 4 of the 5 today, if I'm doing my math right.
They're no longer internet companies; they're just companies.
Right. But so right now, the internet has become the economy. But where I'm ultimately going with this is that the government had a strategy.
Yes.
Right now, when
do you feel like they have a strategy now?
No, and so right now you have the SEC, whether it's looking at crypto, whether it's looking at a whole range of other things, even AI, it started to talk about, where they're effectively using an enforcement-only approach to basically establish the policy for the entire United States. And in crypto, it is very, very inconsistent with where the rest of the world is going. So Coinbase just released a study last week showing, I think, 84% of the G20 countries are actually moving forward with crypto frameworks and crypto legislation. There's reports out there showing that developers are migrating offshore. Electric Capital has a great report on this. And so what I think you're going to end up in the U.S., at least in the short term, is you're going to start to get a framework through the legal process. The SEC has lost a number of cases. That almost never happens, which tells you a little bit how over their skis they are. But that then runs the big risk of we're actually not approaching this strategically. Like going back to the very beginning of this conversation, I think crypto has an enormous potential to be able to do an awful lot of good things in terms of how it distributes economics, how it makes our economy more fair, how it makes it more democratic. I mean, the underlying technology is all designed to be decentralized, distributed, transparent, inclusive. But to optimize for that, you really would need a government wanting to think about this in a strategic way. Why not create aligned incentives so that companies who are looking to get approval, looking to get licenses, amongst the things they need to demonstrate are how they're actually using this technology to advance society. Like that's a strategic way of thinking about it, and that is not just happening. Now for our space, like ultimately we're getting the guidance through the legal system. These businesses are going to be able to adapt. They're really resilient. The technology is inherently resilient. They will work their way through all of that. But we as a society potentially lose the opportunity to really fully leverage the potential here.
Yeah, I also do feel like there is a cultural aspect to the crypto world. A lot of people make jokes about it, obviously warranted, because monkey pictures were once selling for over $1 million. They're not worth that money anymore. And then there's, people who just only care about token prices, money go up, number go up, whatever you want to call it. But then, of course, there's, extreme value in the industry, as you mentioned. As someone who covers this day in and day out, I see the founders and startups who are building really amazing things. And so on that note, I agree with you. But how do you advise your portfolio companies and founders during this regulatory period of uncertainty?
Yeah, so when we raised the fund, we had a little bit of a rubric that we shared in terms of how we would make investment decisions. And at the top of that list was the fact that we would really look for those founders. They didn't necessarily need to be experts in policy, but they did need to recognize that policy was a subject matter that they were going to have to think about as they navigated forward. And so, an awful lot of the work that we do, a lot of the work that I do, Katie Haun, who comes out of government herself, was a significant figure in the Justice Department, helped navigate Coinbase as it went through its process and ultimately became a public company. A lot of the stuff that we do is to advise our companies about how they think about their business models, how they structure themselves, how they sort of navigate, helping to provide a little bit of that roadmap for folks. I mean, this is a lot of the stuff I did at Airbnb. For 7 years. Like when I started at Airbnb, we had to legitimize the business across 100,000 cities and 220 countries and regions around the world, and a lot of that was advising the company and putting in place strategies so that it would become legitimized. And we do versions of that here with our portfolio companies. And we're blessed that we have an incredible group of founders who, as I said at the beginning, like these are value-driven folks. Like they're in this space because they actually want to.
It's not a good time to be in this space.
Right. But they really care. They truly.
If they care enough.
They care enough. And it's interesting you say that. Like if you look at the underlying data, I'm doing this off the top of my head, so slightly. I think this is it's definitely directionally accurate. Maybe slightly off on the percentages, but I think roughly 60% of the folks who own crypto in the U.S. Are Gen Z or millennials under the age of 35, right? 9 out of 10 of them believe the financial system needs to be changed. Over 60% believe that crypto, blockchain are going to be really important in making sure that the economy works better for them, right? These 75% make less than 100K. I think 40% are non-white. And so it's, these are folks who in particular feel like the status quo is not working for them. Yeah. The builders, developers that we see sort of reflect that, right? They're coming at this space because they have genuine values that drive their interest in it. But there's a large number of people, and this represents the next generation that's going to keep moving through. And so if you're looking for signals out there, Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, another really fascinating. There's just so many names that were going through my head when you were asking that question. Yeah. But he's talked about this idea of will there 1 billion people on the blockchain using crypto as we go forward. And if you look at that generational data, like it's a pretty powerful signal of where the world is going. Right? They're driven by the fact that they're dissatisfied with the current situation, particularly economically. They're driven by the fact that they themselves grew up as gamers, going through the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. Like they just come up in a totally different way, right? There is enormous sort of, winds at their back that are driving this desire for change. And so you come back to the SEC, right, and the government, and I do think this is really a question of whose side are you on? Do you want to go forward? Do you want to go backwards? Are you for change or are you for more of the same? Yeah. And like I come out of politics historically, and change always wins. Okay. It always wins.
Yeah, that's a good quote. Change always wins.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yes.
All right, we're going to move on to the rapid fire segment where I just ask you some questions and you give me quick responses.
Okay.
It'll be fun. Would you rather make more bad investments with a few good ones or make a bunch of okay investments with no good ones?
I will say we want to make a bunch of good investments.
All right, so the first one. Do you believe that most VCs keep their investment theses the same throughout the firm's lifespan? Yes or no?
I think you keep your fundamentals, but you're always learning.
Who did you like working for more, Al Gore or Bill Clinton?
They both had incredible qualities, and I was so blessed to work for both of them. And that was a very political answer to a question about two politicians that I was extraordinarily lucky to work for.
Do you think we'll see legitimate regulatory clarity in the U.S. during the next 12 months?
I think we will get clarity through the court process, and then here's my prediction for you.
These are political.
I'm going to give you. Well, you're asking a political guy question. Yeah. So, can I give a prediction on this? Because not to steal your question here.
Please.
I think I think if the following happens, which is 52 million Americans own crypto, if a small portion of those, relatively speaking, become engaged in politics, there's a recent announcement of a goal to organize 1 million crypto holders into crypto voters with a particular focus on some of the key electoral states. If that happens, right, elected officials begin to understand that they win or lose races based on how they approach and think about crypto. And these voters are particularly important for them, young folks of color, under 100K. And so if our sector is able to effectively organize those folks, it's even just a small subset, into voters, you will see the political system react and respond to that very quickly.
Right.
People move very quickly in politics when they know it may impact whether they win or lose, right? Good politics drives good policy.
Yes. Okay. That was a bit long of it.
That was a bit long. Sorry.
That's all right. You'll probably give me a short one for this one. Will Haun Ventures launch another fund within the next 12 months?
There's a time for all seasons.
What would it look like? Would it be bigger or smaller?
Again, it's hard to predict what that season will look like, but there is a time for all seasons.
Okay.
Look, I think that the more serious response is
right.
Katie is a huge huge believer in this space. I haven't seen someone who's more passionate about what this can represent, again, embedded in values and a vision. She's in this for the long haul. We're obviously very much focused and incredibly grateful for the folks who invested in us right now, and obviously are prioritizing that we're making sure that we do everything we can to deliver. But this is a space that's going to be bigger tomorrow than it is today, and next year than it is this year, and we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah. We also have Katie Haun speaking tomorrow, just a side plug.
Yeah, everyone should go. She'll be awesome.
It will be equally as good as this one, potentially. So Haun Ventures has a $500 million early stage fund and a $1 billion acceleration fund. Where do you see, so I guess we talked about the biggest investment opportunities earlier, you talked about the strategy. What are you kind of tired of? What do you think has been like oversaturating the crypto space? You're tired of getting pitch decks on it? Or maybe you just think people aren't doing it correctly?
I think for us, we have a pretty significant screen. Like we're only looking, and people know what we are generally looking for. I think, I think made good decisions and did not end up having positions in some of the higher profile entities that faced some issues. And I think that in a lot of ways speaks to the judgment that Katie brings to this. We do have a really specific rubric that we do follow, and we do it really disciplined. When we raised, we were really clear that we actually thought we were heading into a winter, that we were going to invest with pace.
When was that?
That was literally February, March of 2020, just as the
right before the Terra Luna
just as everything, yeah, and all of that,
FTX,
didn't end up, in any of those. You didn't have any positions in any of those, and I do think speaks to Katie's judgment, the judgment of the overall investment team, the rubric that we have, the values that we bring to it, and that is in no means to say anything about anyone else who may have been involved in those. I mean, there are a lot of folks who are incredibly smart, bright, with great values, where I just think that it's amongst Katie's superpowers, and one of the reasons why we get a lot of really interesting deals that come our way.
And as we are kind of, still in a bear market, valuations are down, less checks are being written. I talked about this yesterday as well, but it looks like crypto funding in the total ecosystem for crypto and blockchain deals is going to drop potentially for a 6th consecutive quarter. It's 5 consecutive quarters, unless there's some crazy deals being announced, maybe you know about. It looks like it's going to fall again. But what do you say?
Are we allowed to announce those on Chain Reaction?
Yeah, I mean,
okay, there
please,
we go.
yeah. next time, unless you have something today. But what do you say in response to all of that? Like, how do you keep the positivity alive, or are you also just realistic that, hey, we're in a bear market, things kind of suck, for lack of better words, and that's just what we're going to work through?
Yeah, I mean, if you take a big step, right, we had a massive macro correction. Tech was hit the hardest.
There's other things as well.
Tech was hurt in the macro correction. At the far end of that, like crypto is probably the one that gets the most whiplash in it. We certainly, as an industry, have to own some of the challenges and problems that have occurred. You've mentioned some of them, the FTXs of the world.
Yep.
And so, there's been a number of things that have come into play. But again, I have one of the greatest jobs in the world, which is I get to every day spend time with these folks who are really thinking about what this technology can do and where it's going to go. We talked about this earlier, but yeah, there are 400+ million people who are out there using it, and they're using it because there are these enormous socioeconomic forces that are driving their interest in it. At the same time, the technology is being developed, so it will become a lot easier for, as people in crypto would say, a normal person to use. And that is happening. Again, this feels the pattern recognition you get from having lived through some of these in the past. It feels so much to me like the time between 2001 and 2004, 5, 6, that then gave birth to Web 2 and the mobile platforms and all sorts of fascinating, interesting companies, including the one that I came out of, Airbnb.
Right.
And we're in that period now, but not just in crypto. I mean, we're in this enormous moment just in the next sort of stage of the architecture of the internet. AI, distributed computing, transportation issues, driverless cars, right? Biotech, where people are making new kinds of, able to do things with genes that you could never have thought of. All this stuff is happening, as we speak. And this event is where you can pick up a lot of it. So it's awesome to have the Disrupt conference. It's awesome for you guys to be covering it. So yeah, I'm really excited and optimistic.
Okay, I love that. We love some hopium. We need that in the crypto
Yes.
industry.
Remember, change wins.
Change wins. And my last question for you, Chris, is we obviously have founders, startups, and a bunch of different people in that world at Disrupt. If you could leave us with a piece of advice for them, what would it be?
Well, I think we've talked a little bit about it, not to be repetitive, but change does win. And you absolutely have to, and I think this does describe 99.9% of those founders. Like, you're going to have so many people telling you why you can't, right? What you have to listen to is why you can. Yeah. Like, that's really what differentiates, I think, a really successful founder is like incredible confidence in what they're doing, and then the ability for themselves to be able to scale that idea, right? Do you have an idea? Can you communicate it? Can you execute on it? And at the core of that is a fundamental belief in what you're doing and why it's important for the world.
Yeah. Think of the kid with his dad in the car.
That kid gave me, and I call him a kid. He's
no, I know he's like an adult, but he's younger.
I mean, he'd run circles around me in terms of his knowledge of tech and his engineering background, and frankly, even his business savvy.
But it says a lot.
But it was just, I mean, you left just like feeling good about the world and where the world was going. Like I think the sooner we get those folks, building out there doing this stuff, like the better it is. And you see so many of them at the conference like this. It is inspiring.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, thank you for taking the time to talk today. And
we didn't even get into UNC hoops.
UNC is the best school. That's where I went to college. But thank you, everyone else, for listening in.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yes, of course. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone.
We'll talk about UNC another